There's a moment that happens in every conversation with a certain kind of person. You're talking about something that matters to you, sharing a frustration, or celebrating a small victory, and you watch their face transform into perfect understanding. They nod at exactly the right moments. They ask thoughtful questions. They mirror your energy with surgical precision. It feels like connection, like being truly seen. But here's the truth. You're not looking at someone who understands you. You're looking at someone who's become a master at becoming whatever you need them to be. That warm validation isn't authentic empathy. It's a performance so practiced, so seamless, that even they've forgotten they're acting. You might think you're meeting their real self, but you're actually encountering their most sophisticated creation, a version of themselves designed to be impossible to reject. Inside the mind of this person lives a complex system that psychologists call the covert contract. It's an unspoken agreement they've written in their own blood. If I am good enough, helpful enough, agreeable enough, then you will love me. The contract exists only in their head, but they've built their entire identity around honoring terms you never agreed to. This architecture was constructed in childhood, usually in homes where love felt like a business transaction, where being wanted meant being useful, where acceptance required the constant editing of their natural responses until only the palatable parts remained visible. They learned early that their authentic reactions were somehow too much, their excitement too loud, their sadness too inconvenient, their anger too dangerous. So they developed an internal monitoring system that scans every impulse before it reaches the surface, asking the same question: will this make them leave? The fawn response becomes their primary survival strategy. While others might fight, flee, or freeze when threatened, they learn to survive by becoming whatever the threat needed them to become. It's emotional camouflage so sophisticated that they disappear completely into the role of the perfect companion. But here's where the architecture becomes a prison. They start measuring their worth not by their own internal compass, but by how successfully they can manage other people's emotional weather. They become human barometers, constantly adjusting their pressure to match the atmospheric conditions around them. Every interaction becomes a performance review. Did they laugh at the right moments? Did they show enough interest? Did they ask the right questions? Their nervous system stays perpetually alert, scanning for signs of approval or the first hints of withdrawal. The exhaustion is profound but invisible. They're like actors who never get to leave the stage, always in character, always monitoring their performance, never allowed to simply exist without purpose. They forget what it feels like to speak without calculating the impact of their words. Their authentic self gets buried so deep that they lose touch with their own preferences, their own opinions, their own desires. They become experts in reading everyone else's emotional needs while remaining strangers to their own. They can tell you what will make you happy, but they can't remember what happiness feels like when it's not reflected in someone else's eyes. The resentment builds like sediment in still water. Every time they say yes when they mean no. Every time they accommodate when they want to object. Every time they prioritize someone else's comfort over their own truth. The anger accumulates in their body, but it can't be expressed directly because anger would violate the very contract they're desperately trying to honor. So it emerges sideways, in passive-aggressive comments that carry the sting of unspoken frustration, in martyrdom that makes others feel guilty for accepting help they never asked for, in the subtle punishment of doing exactly what was requested, but with an energy that makes everyone uncomfortable. They become collectors of evidence for how much they give and how little they receive. Mental accountants tracking every favor, every sacrifice, every moment of selflessness against the sparse returns on their emotional investment. But they can never present this ledger directly, because that would expose the transaction they've been hiding behind the performance of unconditional love. The cruel irony is that their niceness often creates the very rejection they're desperately trying to avoid. People sense the invisible contract. They feel the weight of expectations they never agreed to carry. They lose respect for someone who seems to have no boundaries, no authentic preferences, no real self to discover or be challenged by. But what they don't understand is that their elaborate performance comes with a price that extends far beyond their own exhaustion. The relationships they're trying to protect through constant accommodation slowly suffocate under the weight of all that artificial harmony. Think of intimacy like a garden that needs honest weather to grow. It requires both sunshine and storms, gentle rains and harsh winds. But they've built a dome over every relationship, controlling the climate so carefully that nothing real can take root. Their partners begin to feel like they're loving a hologram, someone who's physically present but emotionally unreachable. The people closest to them start walking on eggshells, not because they're volatile, but because their agreeableness feels fragile. There's something unsettling about someone who never disagrees, never pushes back, never shows the natural friction that comes with having authentic preferences. It creates an uncanny valley of human connection where everything looks right, but nothing feels real. Their children learn that love is performance-based, watching a parent disappear into whatever the family needs, rather than modeling what it looks like to exist as a whole person within relationships. They absorb the lesson that having needs is selfish, that taking up space requires justification, that your worth is measured by how little trouble you cause. Friends stop sharing real problems because his help always comes with an undertone of scorekeeping. His solutions feel more about his need to be needed than their actual well-being. They begin to sense that their struggles are being used as fuel for his identity as the rescuer, the helper, the one who always has time for everyone else's emergencies. In professional settings, colleagues lose respect for someone who never advocates for themselves, never brings authentic perspective to important decisions, never pushes back on unreasonable requests. They mistake his accommodation for weakness, rather than recognizing the sophisticated survival mechanism it actually represents. He watches promotions go to people who seem less qualified, but more willing to occupy space authentically. He sees leadership roles filled by individuals who express opinions, set boundaries, and advocate for their ideas. But he can't connect these observations to his own invisible presence in professional dynamics. The romantic relationships follow a predictable pattern. Partners are initially drawn to his attentiveness, his apparent emotional availability, his willingness to accommodate their every preference. But over time, they begin to crave something he can't provide: genuine challenge, authentic disagreement, the creative tension that comes from two whole people choosing each other rather than one person disappearing into the other's needs. They start to feel guilty for having preferences because his giving feels so selfless. They begin to resent being placed on pedestals they never asked to occupy. They lose attraction to someone who has no edges, no authentic reactions, no real self to discover or be surprised by. The cost shows up in his body as chronic tension from holding back authentic responses, as exhaustion from constantly monitoring everyone else's emotional temperature, as a persistent sense of emptiness that no amount of external validation can fill. His nervous system stays perpetually activated, scanning for threats to his carefully constructed image. He develops what psychologists call emotional anorexia, a systematic starvation of his own emotional needs in service of maintaining his role as the easy one, the helpful one, the one who never causes problems. Like someone who's forgotten how to feel hunger, he loses touch with the internal signals that healthy people use to navigate relationships. The loneliness becomes profound and largely invisible. He's surrounded by people who appreciate his service, but can't access the person providing it. He watches life happen from behind the protective glass of his performance, always observing but never fully participating in the messy, imperfect, beautiful reality of human connection. But perhaps the cruelest cost is what happens to his relationship with himself. Years of prioritizing everyone else's comfort over his own truth creates a kind of internal wasteland where his own voice becomes foreign, his own preferences feel selfish, and his own needs seem like character flaws that need to be managed rather than honored. He becomes a stranger to his own desires, an expert in everyone else's happiness while remaining completely disconnected from what would actually bring him alive. But here's what needs to be understood about this pattern. The very sensitivity that drives the performance is also what makes genuine transformation possible. The same deep awareness that created the elaborate system of accommodation can be redirected towards something far more radical: authentic self-compassion. The rebellion doesn't begin with dramatic declarations or sudden boundary setting that shocks everyone around you. It starts with something much quieter and more subversive, the recognition that your worth was never actually dependent on other people's approval. This realization often comes in moments of unexpected clarity. Maybe you're in the middle of apologizing for something that wasn't your fault, and suddenly you hear your own voice as if from outside yourself. Maybe you catch your reflection while nodding along with an opinion you completely disagree with. Maybe you feel the familiar exhaustion of managing someone else's emotions and think, for the first time, this doesn't have to be my job. The turning point isn't about becoming selfish or uncaring. It's about understanding the difference between kindness and people-pleasing. Real kindness flows from choice, not compulsion. It comes from abundance, not the desperate need to prove your value. It asks what the situation actually needs rather than what will make you look good. Your nervous system has been running on the assumption that authenticity equals abandonment. But what if that assumption was wrong? What if the people worth knowing actually crave the real you more than they appreciate your performance? The gentle rebellion means starting to disappoint people intentionally. Not cruelly, not dramatically, but as a practice in discovering that the world doesn't end when you're not perfect. It means saying no to one request this week without elaborate explanations or apologies. It means expressing a preference when asked instead of the automatic "I don't care." Each small act of authenticity becomes evidence that your nervous system can handle. You discover that most people respect boundaries more than they respect doormats. You learn that expressing genuine opinions often deepens conversations rather than ending them. You realize that taking up space doesn't make you selfish. It makes you real. The practice becomes learning to tolerate other people's disappointment without immediately rushing to fix it. Their feelings about your choices are information about them, not instructions for you. You can be compassionate about their reaction without being responsible for managing it. This is where the real work begins, developing an internal validation system that doesn't depend on external approval. Instead of constantly checking other people's faces for evidence of your worth, you start building a relationship with your own approval. You begin asking not "what will they think?" but "what do I actually think?" The rebellion is gentle because it honors the part of you that learned to survive through accommodation, while also recognizing that survival strategies don't have to become life sentences. You can appreciate the sophisticated system you created to stay safe, while also acknowledging that you're not that vulnerable child anymore. Your sensitivity doesn't need to be cured or overcome. It needs to be redirected from managing everyone else's emotional weather toward honoring your own internal climate. The same awareness that made you an expert in other people's needs can teach you to recognize your own. The path forward isn't about becoming someone completely different. It's about becoming more fully who you've always been underneath all the careful editing. It's about trusting that your unperformed self isn't just lovable, it's necessary. Your journey toward authenticity isn't about becoming someone who doesn't care. It's about becoming someone who cares deeply enough about real connection to risk the discomfort of being genuinely known. The courage to disappoint people is actually the courage to respect them enough to show up as yourself. When you constantly perform to avoid their negative reactions, you're treating them like emotional children who can't handle your humanity. Real respect means trusting that the people worth knowing can navigate the complexity of loving someone with edges, opinions, and authentic needs. This doesn't mean becoming cruel or inconsiderate. It means understanding that your worth was never actually dependent on being easy to love. The relationships that require you to disappear aren't relationships at all. They're arrangements where you provide a service in exchange for the illusion of acceptance. The people who will love your authentic self are worth more than 100 people who love your performance. They're the ones who find your genuine laughter more beautiful than your polite smile, who appreciate your honest disagreement more than your automatic agreement, who feel more connected to your real struggles than your carefully curated helpfulness. Your sensitivity isn't a burden that needs to be managed through constant accommodation. It's a gift that allows you to feel deeply, to understand others intuitively, to offer genuine empathy when it's truly needed, rather than when it's strategically useful. The same awareness that made you hypervigilant about others' reactions can teach you to honor your own internal signals. The practice becomes learning to give from fullness rather than emptiness. When you take care of your own needs first, when you honor your own boundaries, when you speak your own truth, your generosity becomes genuine rather than transactional. You stop keeping score because you're no longer operating from deficit. Think of it like learning to breathe underwater. For years, you've been holding your breath, trying to survive in emotional depths by never taking up the space you need. But you were born with lungs. You were designed to exist fully, to take up space, to contribute your unique voice to the conversation of life. The relationships that can't survive your authenticity weren't actually relationships with you. They were relationships with your performance. And performances, no matter how skilled, eventually exhaust both the actor and the audience. Your real self isn't too much. It never was. It's exactly what the world needs, in all its imperfect, complicated, beautifully human wholeness. The people who can't handle your authenticity are making space for those who can. They're doing you the favor of revealing their limitations so you can invest your precious energy in connections that can hold your full truth. The courage to disappoint isn't about becoming disappointing. It's about becoming real, and real connection, messy, imperfect, sometimes difficult, but genuine, is worth every moment of discomfort it takes to find it. Your performed niceness was never actually nice, but your authentic kindness, flowing from choice rather than fear, from abundance rather than scarcity, from love rather than transaction, that changes everything.